little, the little, now I know how to do it. Okay, so the title, it could just be a working title, but let's go with it. Let's talk about justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. This is a draft. Um, the beginning piece, learning outcomes. I like the idea of talking about outcomes right from the start. That's a great way to kind of frame the rest of the document. So participants will have an orientation of inclusion and apply that to the decisions they make in their capacity as city leadership. Participants will increase their personal understanding of inclusive actions and behaviors. Participants will feel prepared to talk to the city council and community members and advocate for inclusion. And participants will build empathy towards people working on diversity and inclusion initiatives. Just for those who don't know, we're anticipating that the participants will be invited to this. There'll be an invitation to the leadership of the community, which would include city council members, school board members, people who are working on other committees, and management level municipal staff. And so those are the people who will receive invitations to join the discussions. Okay, so the first section, introducing concepts and building trust. So that's pretty basic introductions. I'm assuming, Christy, you'll do some sort of overview for this as you just did.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it would probably sound similar to what you have just presented to us.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Then hopes and fears. So an exercise to at least express to each other what some of our hopes are for this kind of a discussion, and then what our fears are. So we put it right out there, you know, what people are concerned about. I think that that's a way to get people to understand each other in terms of where there might be some difficulties and also some desires of their own, because while we may have an idea about what we would like the outcomes to be, some of the participants might have some ideas of their own about what their hopes are, what they would hope to get out of it. And I think it's a good idea to bring that up. So review of intended learning outcomes, that's what we just talked about. And then the overview of the brave space and ground rules. So Christy, do you want to explain that one?
So, you know, every time you come into one of these conversations, we're like, okay, everybody, we're going to set ground rules, and it's going to be no yelling and mutual respect and, you know, all the sorts of things that people will brainstorm in those areas. What we have proposed and have the way that we've been working is that rather than sort of creating a safe space, which is what those ground rules are intended to do, but people sort of look at askance at this point, be like, oh, safe space. We want to create a space where people can be brave, where people can feel empowered to say the thing that might not be popular in the room, or say the thing that they're not sure about. And in order to do that, the traditional ground rules don't work for that. We need to find ways to facilitate dialogue, to allow people to say the thing that is maybe a little bit controversial, while also recognizing that thing that you've said could have an impact on somebody in the room. So there's a whole conversation around that, thinking about, you know, how we use that in dialogue, how we manage when somebody says something that does upset us, that we have a visceral reaction, which is what a trigger is. What do you do with that? Do you opt out? Do you stop listening? And then we'll try to connect that with folks with their role. How would you use this framework? You know, all of us facilitate conversations in some way, shape, or form in our day job. How would you use these guidelines to help facilitate that?
Great, thank you. Each session is going to be 2 hours long. So obviously in the middle somewhere, and it shows up here, a bio break for people to get tea or coffee or use the restroom or just get out and get some fresh air, whatever it is. And that 5-minute break is for that purpose. And then the next, when we come back together, defining key terms, systems, what the systems are: inclusion, privilege, and race. And I'm assuming, Christy, that's pretty much defining them, yes?
Yeah, and so a lot of the stuff in this these are sort of my internal notes, so they're half-formed thoughts that I wanted to wait until we had a conversation here to flesh them out some more. This is a session where we talk about, let's create a shared language so that we can all make sure that we're speaking the same language when we're talking to each other. So I'll have a glossary that I provide. We'll talk about our shared understandings of some of the definitions of these words and others that aren't. So it's a facilitated activity.
Great. And then closure for that particular section.
Yes, which will, define that more clearly, but sort of bringing it all together and thinking about the next steps forward.
Great. Okay, and the session 2, Ellen? Okay. So this gets more into some specifics. Obviously, welcome back, review session 1 and reflections about session 1. This is examining identities and systems. So looking back to forward, we thought it was important to kind of embed this in our specific community. So I have created a timeline of Barre history. And the way I do timelines is generally to allow people to, this is an actual physical schematic. It's a timeline that we can all look at and examine. Give people a couple of minutes to look it over. And then I generally walk through each particular section. We can put that up later if people want to look at it more specifically and if we have time with this evening's meeting. And although there's just little snippets in each section, in each date, I can kind of elaborate a little bit more on why that particular item was there. I tried to be as inclusive as possible in terms of hitting all of or many of the diversity issues and bias issues. So it's really specific to those items. It's not like the whole history of Barre, all of the immigrants and all of this and that. No, it's just specific to particular incidents and historical elements that would allow us to kind of think about our history in a very specific way, in a way that would have us looking at where the diversity came from and how people were treated when they first immigrated to town, because we do have an immigration history. However, not because of a lot of ways that that's presented, it all looks very happy. And yeah, we have the Italians and we have the Scottish and we have all these folks. But in reality, when these people immigrated to our community, they were not necessarily treated as if they would be included. So that's the kind of thing that we'll talk about during that section. And then, Christy, you want to take the next one, the cold day story?
Yeah, so moving on and talking about identities, everyone has identity. Identity is not owned by folks who identify as outside of what the mainstream and what we are, used to seeing in our day-to-day. We all have privilege, we all have identities. And so we'll start to talk about how do we identify what's important to us in terms of our identity. So have a little, again, like this is just my shorthand, so I don't want to get into too much detail about what these, I'm not going to tell you the cold day story. We'll get to that in the session. But generally talking about personal privilege and where it shows up. We will work through a personal identity exercise that thinks about when have I personally felt included or excluded. And I also want to pause to say, the folks who are opting into this session or choosing to take part in this curriculum, no one's ever compelled to share, right? Like this is a challenge by choice situation, an invitation to participate. We think that people who will want to take part in these sessions will be more inclined to share. But this is not the Socratic method where I'm pointing at people and compelling them to disclose things. It's we'll work through it together as a group. So we have a personal identity exercise to be clear about, what are the things that are important to you when you think about your identity and who you are, what comes up for you. We'll take a quick bio break and then come back to expand from personal identities and privilege to systems of power and privilege, which exist all around us, whether we want them to or not. And from previous conversations with the committee or parts of the committee talking about, what are the ideals of the United States? When this country was founded, it was to provide a place for people who were being oppressed, right, in other places. And so how have we maintained that? How have we continued to allow that to be the truth? And then how has that become weaponized in some situations? And again, taking those identity pieces and looking at the sort of bigger picture, where does this show up and cause harm in ways that were unintended? And generally just, again, returning to why should I care about this? Why is this important to me beyond just me as a person? What are the things that are happening around me in my community, in my workplace, in my city that I need to be mindful of? We'll move into some case studies again. I think those can be really illuminative for folks to practice in real life, like how would I deal with this situation? And I'll try to, once we know who's participating, try to tailor these case studies to the type of work that people are doing in their real lives. So we'll do that. And then we'll have a closure activity just to bring it back together. Again, this is the day where people will be invited to share personal experiences. And so I think we'll tread carefully on this day and return regularly to the guidelines and sort of the brave space framework that we established on day one that will continue to show up and serve as a reminder of the agreements that we've made to each other. So when we come back for session 3, again, there might be some lingering feelings about session 2, and we will process that. I think it's always great to have a reality check. I'm a pretty direct person to say, like, how is this feeling? Are there things that you were hopeful and fearful about coming to bear? Are you making connections with your work and how you might implement this, or your person, what things are coming up for you is the conversation that we'll be having. I recently was in a training session where someone showed this video, The Power of Vulnerability by Brene Brown. I'm generally not a fan of like pop culture authors that like everybody's talking about, but I actually found this video compelling because when we're talking about building empathy and caring about other people, part of that is being vulnerable and recognizing that, that requires us to take a step outside ourselves and say, I care about somebody else's experience. And that has an impact on me, and it might make me feel bad, and it might make me react in a certain way. And so I like that video just as a jumping off point. So I assume we'll be in a space that we could have some kind of Wi-Fi that we can just watch that video and have a conversation. And then we'll move to talking about empathy again, really thinking, what does empathy mean? How do you build it? How do you know you have it? Everyone has it in there somewhere, and I don't want to get too like woo-woo about it, but some of this work is about remembering that we are all humans, and the humans have to interact with each other in a way that is respectful and caring and kind. Because if we're not starting from that foundation, then what is the point of interacting at all? I would like to talk about, since these folks will likely be folks in leadership and who are employees of the city, when we're creating policies, we can't legislate our way to inclusion. There are things that we can put into place that say these are the guardrails that keep us on the road, but without being a little bit vulnerable, without building empathy, without thinking about our own identities and how our identities play into the system writ large, we're not going to be able to move past it. So we'll do another set of case studies related to that. Take that bio break, come back for the courageous conversations, which I discussed a little bit earlier, which are, again, sort of a low-level hot topic issues, but where we'll begin to practice. So that it'll be an introduction of like, here's what a facilitated dialogue looks like. Here's what the expectations for a courageous conversation look like. And then we'll practice it, and then we'll debrief it. So that's why that's a little bit longer section. And then we'll have closure activity and a little bit of homework, low lift homework. I don't want people to feel like this is an undue burden. So yeah, so that's the end of session 3. And then, as I said, session 4, we'll welcome back. We'll always revisit our shared agreements at the beginning of every session to make sure that there's not something that we missed or something that we want to add. Those are a living document that will come back at the beginning of every session just to check in to make sure people are feeling okay. We'll talk about the homework, and then we'll really shift to action planning and thinking. With everything that we've discussed, and I don't want to say everything that we've learned, because like learning is a process. Everything that we've discussed over the first 3 sessions, it likely brought some stuff up for you that you can connect, because we all start thinking about what's the next thing? What am I going to do with this? Why are we here? I'd like to talk about the action continuum, and I don't know if people are familiar with that. The action continuum is when you first learn that like there are isms in the world, or that there are identities that are treated differently from you. You move from action, either actively participating, you can pretend it doesn't exist, but then at some point you start to recognize like, oh, there is different treatment happening. And I see that this person is being treated differently. Is that because of their identity? Then you start to be curious. You ask yourself questions. You come and talk with others. Maybe you have a conversation with a family member. And so we'll talk about the action continuum as part of the process of incorporating this learning, right? Yeah, so that's all I'll say about that. Then we'll take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll do a goal setting or an action planning activity. It will be something that is forward facing. What am I going to do in the next week, in the next month, in the next year? It might be more vision related or strategic planning. Again, I want to wait to see who's in the room. And then we'll do a closure activity. The learning outcomes, and I forgot to mention this at the beginning, those learning outcomes will be used to develop a pre and post assessment so we can try to measure the shift in attitudes over the course. I don't want to survey people to death, but I do think it's important that we try to measure whether any of this landed or was affected or impactful in any way. So
one of the things that a pre and a post assessment will help us with is to determine how effective this particular style of education or this particular style of conversation is. And I think efficacy is very important if we want to continue this. Mm-hmm. It also gives us an opportunity to make adjustments before we do the next session or the next group, let's say. Because we expect to run at least 3, perhaps hopefully 4 groups through this process. Okay, are there any questions from anyone?
Or even just general reactions. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to hear directly from you on the committee, what your thoughts on what your expectations were, what are some things that you think are just going to be, maybe this isn't the right way to approach it, or things you were hoping to see that aren't included.
So I would take comments or from the committee first, and then if anyone else from the community.
Oh, is there public in addition to community here? Okay, sorry, didn't realize the distinction.
Do you like to keep sharing the screen or end the screen sharing?
Let's end the screen sharing. If someone wants to look at it again, we can bring it back up.
Thank you.
I see that William has his hand up. Go ahead, William.
Just a quick question. Will there be an opportunity to make some suggestions in terms of the history of Barre timeline with you?
We could discuss that after we go through this. Sure.
Okay. Okay, sounds good.
What are some reactions from other folks? What do we think about this? Go ahead, Emily.
I think this is very exciting. Looks like such a great program. I wish that I could participate in it and be part of the participation, but I'm really proud to be on the committee side of this and supporting this. I think such important discussions will come out of this. I love the way, Christy, you were talking about the difference between discussion and learning. I think that's such an important distinction, and I had never thought of that before.
Well, Emily, when we were anticipating participants, our committee would be a part of the participants. One of the things that's kind of the vision is to continue these kinds of discussion groups with the committee members as facilitators once we get an idea of how this works.
That's so exciting, Joelle, and really changes the way I feel about this program too. I feel very empowered about that. Thank you.
Okay. Michael, I saw your hand up and now it's down, but I'll take Christopher next. Go ahead, Christopher. I'm sorry, Chris.
Okay. I just want to thank Christy. I think this is really tremendous, and I can't wait for it to happen, basically. So I'm glad we're doing this.
Thank you.
Does anyone else want to speak to the project? Michael?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Christy, for bringing this program here. I looked through a lot of the information and it looks great. I'm excited for some of the conversations that are going to happen and see how we can kind of figure out our biases and really kind of understand how we can move forward and make sure that we have really the best community that we can live in. So thank you for doing this.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Lisa, please.
Hi, Joelle. And I was just wondering, I'm sorry I was a few minutes late. I had another meeting this evening. Who all is able to attend to this? Is it kind of designed for like council and committees or and city staff, or who all can participate?
One of the things that we thought about when we began to vision this was that it would be a good idea to have a more eclectic group of people, let's say. So it would be all of those layers of leadership, including committee members, people who have taken other types of leadership than the traditional ones, so that we have, the police department, the chairs of the committees and committee members, also people from the school board, those folks who have kind of more agency in terms of how the community can move forward. Does that answer your question?
Well, I want to do it.
And the thing is that once we get a kind of our sea legs under us with this and really understand how this can work, then we can expand out into the community and into the community at large, so to speak, and figure out ways to have these conversations, which is one of the reasons that committee members would be committed to coming to this and to participating, so that we can train ourselves kind of how to continue this process.
And one of the deliverables that I'll provide at the end of the process is a full facilitator's guide. Knowing that we may, make tweaks along the way or find that an activity didn't work the way that it did, but I can provide that to you to continue to use, make sure you give me credit if you don't mind. But I want, in a train the trainer situation where I'm not always going to be able to come and facilitate, you all can be on the ground floor of going through the process and learning to facilitate the conversations as well.
Yeah. Anyone else want to weigh in here? Greg, I mean, not to call you out Socratically, but how are you feeling about this?
Oh, pretty good. I'm embarrassed to say that I still haven't figured out how to raise my hand in in Zoom yet. But yeah, I think it looks very promising. It looks exciting. I think we could get this off of the ground and we can have a real positive impact on the community overall if hopefully participants will come flooding in. But thank you, Christy, for coming and sharing this with us.
That's great. Okay, so now that we have one of the things that we had to talk about, and not that we're going to resolve it this evening, but how do we make it accessible to people in terms of the actual schedule? Because we're asking for this kind of broad broad level of participation, and there will be some people who are staff people and some people who are not, some people who have full-time jobs, and they may not be able to make a daytime schedule. So my thinking around that was perhaps in the beginning, the first is to actually run 2 sessions in the beginning instead of just one. And maybe holding one, of course, we have to see if that's okay with you, Christy, but do it in such a way that there can be a daytime schedule and maybe a weekend schedule so that we can capture as many of the invitees as possible. There are some people who may not be able to take time off their jobs if they're not working for the city. And on the other hand, there might be municipal workers who obviously would not want to necessarily come on the weekend. Ellen?
Conversely, we could do it, we could make the first session, think about who's going to come to that first session, make the schedule for that. The people who can't be in that schedule can do the second session. I'm a little concerned about doing 2 at the beginning when we haven't tried it yet.
I would agree. Like this feels like a 1.0. And I'm coming into your community and into your context with a curriculum that might need a little bit of tweaking. And so I think that would be a good approach. I would agree with Ellen.
Okay. We can get into that detail later, and also, of course, with Rick's help, because he'll be more aware of what the needs are for the municipal workers, the people who work for the city. That's a good idea. Okay, that's great. I think that at this point, I can, with your permission, Christy, can I put this schematic up on our website so that people can take a look at it? Do you think it's ready?
Let me take out some of my shorthand, if that's okay.
Yes.
Because sometimes there's just notes to myself. And then I can provide you a PDF to put up on the website. Would that be okay?
That would be fine. And that way, we can, people can take a look at it, and it'll live there so that it's a documentation of what we've been doing, and yeah.
Great.
I have a question about that, Joellen.
Yeah.
What is the reason for putting that schematic up on the website and not something more, a short summary about these sessions? Because we all have had the benefit of listening to Christy tonight, of having this put into context.
Hmm.
But there are many different feelings about this kind of work in our town, in our city. And if it just is on there for anybody to sort of grab and, take out of context, I'm not sure. I think that could be counterproductive, actually.
So, Christy, would you work with me on some kind of description?
Yeah, I think what we could do, and I, generally when I have done this kind of work, we'll put together a summary. I could do a summary for each session and talk about some of the themes. But to put the agenda up for, Ellen's point is well taken. It's also an intellectual property thing that, there's lots of people who are trying to do diversity and inclusion work these days. And so don't necessarily want to put my whole curriculum up there. But anyway, I think we could certainly try to adequately summarize each session, what participants can expect, and have that be posted.
My goal is to be not only open to what we're doing, but also to attract people to the idea in a positive way. So whatever we can do to identify that would I think, be useful.
Yeah.
And because we didn't say anything sooner, and this is just coming up now, if anybody here has done anything like take screenshots of what was presented tonight on the screen, please do not share that. We heard Christy, this is her work, and this should be shared out of context. Thank you.
That's one of the reasons I didn't want to record it, because if it goes into a recording, but what we can do is ask Rick to hold the recording, since we're not required to record, and then anyone who may want to take a look at it could make a request, maybe, you
Yeah,
know.
and I don't wanna overblow, like, it's not like we're talking about government secrets here, right? Like, I think, it's this, I don't wanna be overly secretive, because that, then people will create a whole other narrative either, you know, it's just the norm is to post a summary or a, you know, an overview of what to expect. If this, you know, whatever the rules are for city meetings, follow your rules. Like, I don't want anybody to get into trouble. But, you know, I think the point about documents being taken out of context is a really important one to me.
I agree. I agree. And to that point, I'm not sure about this, but I think that were we as a committee wanting to participate, I would want to limit the participation so that we didn't run into any open meeting laws, unless, I mean, I'm not really sure how that works in terms of, you know, if you're going to something like this, would a quorum be, you know, what the ideas around a quorum for this would be. So, for example, 3 committee members could go to one session and 3 committee members could go to the next one, so that we're all participating, but not necessarily at the same time, to avoid that.
Yeah, same with city council or other boards that have to deal with open meeting and quorum. Yeah.
Of course, if Joellen, if you are presenting during the meeting, then you would count the history of Barre, you would count as one of the members for each of the for each of the sessions.
Well, not if that's the only thing I did and then left. I mean, you know, that would be an issue. In fact, I'm not sure it would be an issue at all, because I know that different bodies of the city have had things like retreats and that type of thing where the public is not invited. So I can check into that to make sure. All right. So do we want to take a look at the timeline of Barre history? I have to get my glasses.
And while Joellen is getting her glasses, you know, as you all sit with this, if you have additional thoughts, please send them my way. I think my email, I'll put it in the chat so people can email me directly. If there were things you were expecting to see or things that you're curious about, I'm happy to talk more or provide a bit more context. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
So let me just start by saying that I've done these timelines before for various different things. The organization I worked for here in the city, called New Directions for Barre, was held an anti-racism summer program for teens and community members. And so one of the effective ways to kind of root things in the community is to talk about the history in terms of a timeline. And like I said, this is specific to diversity and bias. And I began, you want to put it up, Ellen, can you? Okay, great. I begin, of course, with the history of the Abenaki. And here you'll see, so one of the reasons to take so much time with this particular set of historical facts or historical ideas is that it's really, this is the basis for all really property law in Vermont. And since we're talking about our community, this is, and how the community developed, this is why I spent so much specific time on this. So 12,000 BC to the present, that's the territory. I'm specifically, no, this is all Abenaki territory. But then I move into the Western Abenaki because that is more specific to Vermont. And for that, the boundaries were the Connecticut River, the St. Lawrence River, Lake Champlain, and somewhere below Deerfield, Massachusetts, until they run into other tribal groups. So this area was a colony, of course, a colony of England that was later claimed by both New York and New Hampshire. And then what happened was during the French and Indian War, there was an awful lot of diaspora of native groups from all over the region, including the first massacre of the Pequot, who came up the Connecticut River to take refuge with the Abenaki families and community. The ancient village of Odanak, which is up on the St. Lawrence River, on the southern side of the St. Lawrence River, then was identified by the King of France, Louis IV, as a protectorate, so that that would be a place where all refugees from various different tribes around New England would be able to seek refuge and to live. And of course, Odanak is still there, and it is still one of the major seats of Abenaki government. Another area that was the Missisquoi region, which is Swanton, Vermont, and mainly their seats of government were around the borders. There was also the 3 villages on the Connecticut River near what's now Newbury, Vermont. So the thing that I think people don't understand about Abenaki life in this part of the world is that before the Revolutionary War, really, they basically jobbed themselves out as scouts to move the armies through this part of Vermont, north of the Winooski River, really it wasn't a border yet, but north, and then west to Lake Champlain and east to the Connecticut River. Was pretty much there was no European village here at that time. And they were just moving the armies through so that they could keep their land for themselves. Then our favorite patriots, Ira and Ethan Allen, came to Vermont to survey for the Onion River Company. And they basically sliced and diced up the state, and then sold it. Not that they ever settled everywhere, but the first round of land claiming was then sold off to others in mostly down country in Massachusetts for families to come up. There's only 3 ways at that time, and still, that land could be claimed away from the indigenous people. One was that they were conquered, another was that they ceded their land, and the other was that they abandoned it. And because of what I described before of how the Abenaki got involved with the Europeans, they never ceded their land. They were never conquered. They were actually allies during both the French and Indian War and the Revolutionary War. The only thing then that could work would be as if the Continental Congress were convinced by Ethan Allen that there were no Indians here, that they all left. So he went down to the Congress and basically put forward that idea that that they had abandoned their land. And of course, some did go up to Odanak because of the wars, but obviously because they're still here, many stayed. Many of the families stayed. Then after that,
Now,
yeah.
oh,
Hi.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize my mic was on. I've got a crazy beagle here.
Not to worry. More to the point of Barre, Goldsberry, and after the New York and the New Hampshire grants, Goldsberry and Rogers settled in Newbrook, which is near what's now called the Honey and Ketchum Brooks. That's after they purchased the land from the Onion River Company. Those 2 families were the first settler families in Barre. And Honey and Ketchum Brooks, if you don't know where that confluence is, it's up sort of in Barre town, kind of north, it would be northeast sort of the area. Goldsberry is over here now on Beckley Hill, that whole section. And then Rogers' family was more toward where now Lincoln School is. So those were the areas that were settled by those 2 families. Then Ira records the town or the area as Newbrook, eventually called Wildersburg. And that's when 63 settler families came into town and settled the 19,000 acres that are called Wildersburg. And I did not put in there when the name changed to Barre because I didn't think that was so relevant to this particular topic. Then some folks say that it was earlier than this, 1793. Some say I think it was 87, that the Vermont Constitution held that all persons are born equally free and independent. Therefore, slavery and indentured servitude in any form are prohibited. Scholars have done a lot of work on this, and some Vermont scholars have talked about how Vermonters did keep slaves. There were slaves kept here. Then in 1870, this was the first census since the abolition of slavery, recorded an Andrew Shields as a free colored live-in laborer to Charles Bassett. This is a house, actually, Charles Bassett had his livery on what's now Washington Street, up near, kind of near where Quality Market is. So then in the 18th, you know about the granite industry, of course, came in. Originally, it was to make millstones and lintels for buildings. But then they realized that they had quite a gold mine or a granite mine here, and that it could be developed into a big industry, which of course eventually it was. And one of the things that happened was in the 1890s, new tools were developed, tools that would produce a lot more dust than just a hammer and a chisel. So what happened was the dust it contains particulates that caused silicosis. But because the industry was all powerful and they did not want to take responsibility really for the kind of for silicosis, they convinced the workers, and the doctors were in collusion with this, that people had tuberculosis. In fact, up here on Beckley Hill, the seminary there began as a place where people would go if they had tuberculosis. And there are some great stories about that, because they weren't the workers were not, the dust was so thick in the sheds that if you held your hand in front of your face, you couldn't see it. And so and of course the air was not at that time used to get that deadly dust out of their environment, and they were not wearing masks either. In fact, that was one of the reasons that the Vermont Health Department developed, was because of the issue of silicosis in the industry. Then in the immigration was first, the Scottish had come. They brought the union idea to the community because they were unionized over in Aberdeen. And when the work was drying up there, they came here, and they eventually became, because they were the first, the owners of the sheds and the owners of the quarries. And now there's only one quarry, but at that time there were many quarries up on the hill, not just one. So then there was a law after the Civil War that the federal government was going to help communities build monuments to the Civil War veterans and the Civil War leaders. And with that, they needed a different kind of skill. They needed a full round sculpture skill, which the Scottish did not have. They could do the bas-reliefs and the roses and the flowers and the letters, and of course do the quarrying, but they were not skilled in that. So the owners went into northern Italy, around the Carrara area, and got a lot of the Italian sculptors and stone carvers there to come to Barre to work here. This was not the only place. They actually started immigration into the southern part of New England, around Massachusetts, to work there, and then eventually came up here. So within 10 years, up to 1900, from 1880s to 1900, our population in the city increased 10,000 to 10,000 people, most of whom were immigrant laborers. And they also brought their union and their activism to the community. And if anyone was able to come to the May Day celebration at the Labor Hall this past weekend, they got treated to a much more detailed description of the kinds of political activism that was active in the 1900s here in the city. So one of the things that did happen, however, was that, of course, the people who came from Italy were not speaking English; they were speaking Italian, and the Anglos who were already here did not necessarily look upon them with great inclusion ideas. They were quite separate at the time. In fact, the Italian community in the North End created their own city council, their own economic endeavors, and eventually built in 1900 the Socialist Labor Party Hall, which still exists, thank goodness, on Granite Street in the city. And they were, because really the cultural differences were so great between the way Anglo folks behaved and the way the radical Italians behaved, they were looked upon as being quite dangerous. And in fact, some were. I remember I interviewed Governor Dean Davis once, and he was telling me, because he was a young lad at the time, and he delivered, he worked for the feed company and delivered to lots of the Italian households, and was very intrigued by the labor hall, and often would kind of hang out there, even though his parents forbid him to. And he was the one that told me that his parents called it the bucket of blood, which is what it was kind of a nickname for the place by the Anglos. So then I got into a little bit, so during the strikes, during some of the major strikes, when the management and the leader and the owners were trying to bust the unions, what they did was try to elongate the strikes and to kind of crush the Italian unions by bringing in workers from the French Canadian communities. Up there at that time in the 1915s and a little further on, the farms had gone bust up there, and there was a lot of labor to be had. And they were trucked into town and actually housed at the quarries so that they wouldn't interact with the rest of the community. Of course, they were not looked upon very well by the Italians. So now we have another immigrant group coming in that was also not welcome because they were strikebreakers, basically. And not basically, they were strikebreakers, but they didn't know that they were. They had no idea. It doesn't go without saying, but later on, they actually, like within 20 years, they were all, because it was a closed shop, so they had to become union members themselves eventually, and actually leadership in the union kind of ceded to the French Canadian laborers over time. This is a very kind of masculine community because many of the workers who came here came without families. They were very young. They were young men. And so there's not too much going on for women in the community until, well, in the 1900s, in 1919, 1912, actually, in the beginning, there was a clerks union that developed. A lot of the clerks in town, not a lot of them, but that's at least one place where women could work. Now, the men, their husbands were dying young of silicosis, and they had no way to work. So a lot of them used their homes to be either grappa houses. Grappa is the Italian whiskey made from grapes. And this, of course, was during the Prohibition, too. Or rooming houses and boarding houses. So Emma Goldman came to town, and one of the speeches that she was going to give, she gave a series of speeches. She came several times to Barre, not just once. But in this particular case in 1918, She was arrested by the police and put on a train out of town before she could give a speech on women's productive rights. So I thought that was kind of one of the first times where, and Mother Jones came also during the clerk strike to talk about solidarity and why there was not solidarity between basically the men's unions and the clerks union, which actually had a lot more women in it. Maybe I should put that in there, but I didn't. So I wanted also to identify how widespread and how big the union presence was in the city, and that's why I put that of 1919. The KKK movement in Vermont was basically a well, it was anti-Catholic, it was anti-Jewish. It wasn't what we think about when we think about the KKK in our national history. So there was a cross burning on West Hill. The Barre and the Montpelier branch were kind of married together. They met together and they considered each other, that was the same group. And of course, you could not belong to the KKK unless you were a white Protestant. So I thought that would be important to identify. In 1923, the first woman was elected city clerk. The reason it's in red is because I'm not certain about that date, and that's something I have to check on to make sure. Then, of course, there's the Vermont Eugenics Survey, which affected not just Indigenous people, although it definitely affected them to a much larger degree. But there were like 35 different qualities that you could be put into that program. And illiteracy was one. Being an immigrant is another. And certainly there were enough immigrants here. Non-white, if you were poor, and also if you had other kinds of disabilities like blindness, drunkenness. I did not list all 42 characteristics, but those are the ones certainly that would have, especially the immigrant characteristic. So let's see, that brings us, in 1932, my neighbor told me about this. He belonged to the Barbers Union, and he said that he went around with other union members to collect money for the defense of the Scottsboro Boys, which I found very interesting. And the Scottsboro Boys, oh boy, I can't remember what exactly the issue was. I will before I present this in public, more public than us. But basically, it was about collecting money for, I believe they were Black folks. That I can't remember exactly what the issue was, but that wasn't even in Vermont. It was in the South. So I found this once when I was researching something else, and I found it so interesting. In 1933, there was a mixed race of people, members of the Civilian Conservation Corps, which actually bivouacked in Barre. They were the ones that built the dam in East Barre. And in one of the Rock of Ages magazines, they described some as an invasion swelled the ranks, including fresh Negro levies, and that the presence of these government employees is regarded with grave apprehension, fear for our city and its Nordic womanhood, which is an amazing quote. And it certainly goes a little bit of a ways to describe how some folks felt about this. In 1933, also, the Barre Annual Report indicated that almost all the payments to the city's poor are listed as immigrants. So I wanted to represent here that they were the downtrodden of the community, the immigrant folks. And at that time, they also included French Canadian, but it was mostly Italian and French Canadian families, assuming that many of those families were poor because they lost it's still in 1933, there was still workers dying young of silicosis. And since that was the major industry here, it affected the whole community. My recollection is that Barre City was designated a refugee city, and I have not been able to find the dates of when that happened. But this was during the diaspora of after the Vietnamese War, and Vermont was designated as a refugee state for people coming from Vietnam. And then, of course, afterwards from the Congo, from Bosnia, and then Russia. The people who actually were part of that organizing group I couldn't locate them, and things are completely different now. So I'll try and get the date for that. Now, I described before that this was a very masculine community, and one of the things I think that's interesting is that there was no woman on the Barre City Council, even though this was a radical community in the 1900s. And the Wobblies were here, the socialists were here, anarchists, communists, everybody. Women were not their priority, apparently, because there were no women in leadership here until 1982, when Fran Fiorucci was, I believe, the first woman elected to the Barre City Council. Then in 1984, she ran for mayor, the first time a woman ever ran for mayor. And only 3 women have run since, none winning election. And then Ellen Andrews was elected the second woman to the Barre City Council, and that was in 1998. I was working in the schools at the time that this happened. There was a young, Cindy Young was in 5th grade, but even since she was in kindergarten, she had told me that she was discriminated against because she was Chinese. And the administration, well, her parents did not speak English. So it was very difficult for them to advocate for her in the school system. I became her mentor when she was in 5th grade. And so this was one of the things she brought to me as an issue she wanted to work on. So I encouraged her to write about it. And she wrote this play called Shadow Girl, which is an amazing play. And it talked about her experience with racism against her from students. It was an interactive play where everyone this little girl was so brilliant. She created this play where it was interactive, where everyone in the class had a part, including the teacher. And they performed it together. And at the end, we were processing it. And one of the children said, it was about this particular incident where she was on the bus every morning, and a boy sitting behind her kept pushing her chair and kicking her chair and saying that she smelled like pork and called her China girl. And so after the presentation of the play, when we were processing it, one of the little girls in the class said, "Oh, I don't believe that ever happened." And then a boy raised his hand and said, "Yes, it did, because I was that boy." I thought that was pretty amazing. So in New Directions for Barre was a youth risk behavior prevention community coalition. And in 2004, we organized an annual summer anti-racism institute. And we got some, Paige Wadley Bailey, who was an activist, a radical activist, anti-racism activist in the state, and Sha'an Moulier, who I believe some of you have met because she came to one of our meetings, helped to create the curriculum for that. And it was a week-long summer institute where students got an opportunity to really delve into the issue. Some of the students who were involved in it, there was an incident where racist graffiti was spray painted on Granite Street, on the bridge, on the roadway, and also at the Route 62 underpass. You can even notice how that has, there's like when we painted it over, they painted it kind of a different color, so you can still see the remnants of that painted process to actually eradicate the graffiti. Then in October of 2007, there was a racial incident at Spalding High School, and the parents of the child who was the victim, in their lawsuit, or they didn't actually sue, but they threatened to sue I don't remember if they actually sued or threatened to sue, but the upshot of it was that they wanted to have some kind of an anti-bias, anti-racism curriculum embedded into the school somehow. And so in 2008, again, a group of anti-racism activists in the state, Paige Wadley Bailey being one of them, wrote a curriculum for the high school's health and wellness class. That's where it was embedded so that everyone would have to go through it. I think it morphed since then. I don't know even if they still have a unit about that in their curriculum. I can check on that, but I think more relevant is that it was even done. And then in 2010, Spalding High School started the its own Gay Straight Alliance. In 2014, there was a pop-up queer dance party at the Socialist Labor Party Hall. And in 2017, the Spalding High School formed their Diversity and Equity Committee. Then in 2018, it was the first annual Barre Pride celebration. In 2018 was the first time there were actually 2 women elected to the city council. 2019 was, of course, when we were created. I believe, well, yeah, it was 2019. The city created its first Diversity and Equity Committee. That's us. Then in 2020, the demonstrations during, this was during the election, when people were at City Hall Park with the kinds of flags and the signage displayed were representing white supremacy. The Don't Tread on Me, the Confederate battle flags, and a White Lives Matter flags. Then in November 2020, the City Council voted to fly the Black Lives Matter flag in the month of December, as recommended by our committee. I didn't go any further because I thought, that would kind of cap it off. We can, if people want to add things to it, or if people can think of other things that are relevant to this particular topic. But that's basically it. Michael.
Yes. So we actually had Jeffrey Tupper Giles as the first openly gay counselor that was elected. You may want to put that in there.
Wait, say that again, Michael. I didn't catch it.
Jeffrey Tupper Giles was the first openly gay counselor elected. And I can't tell you the exact date.
All right. Well, that'll
and I apologize for that.
That's all right. I can look it up in the annual reports. Can you get ballpark so I don't have to look through all of them?
I can. I know. I think it was like 2016, 17. I can get that information. Send me an email,
Okay, I'll do
Joanne,
that.
and I'll get that for you.
Thank you, Michael.
Sure. Emma Goldman, I think she wasn't arrested in Barre City. I think she turned herself in New York.
No, this was a different time. You're right, she did, but this is a different incident, and it's actually in the Barre Daily Times, so that's where that comes from. Which was
okay? Because I was just curious because when I looked her up in the Barre Times, it said that it was February 2018. She had surrendered herself. Her and Berkman, I think it was.
Yeah, but that was much later. That was a whole different incident.
That was before.
Okay, well, I think you wrote 2018, so that's the reason why I was.
I'll check the date on that because it's in her diary. So I'll check in her diary.
You're talking about 1918, not 2018.
Right.
Did I say? I'm sorry. I mean, I'm sure we can figure that out, Ellen. I apologize for the mistake.
I'll figure that out.
Also,
we're putting it up here is to catch those kind of things.
Yeah. Also, I feel like the Gay Straight Alliance was available back in the 90s.
Nope. That date comes from the Spalding High School archive. I mean, that's the date that came up. When you Google them, when you look at
Joellen, it's Emily. I think we did have an ally club in 2003 at Spalding High School. I think that, are you remembering that, Michael?
Yeah, Mrs.
But we could find out.
You, I think it may not be in the records, but
Okay,
there was something there.
and what
I
date?
can guarantee you that.
2003?
Well, mine was from I remember 1997-ish.
Okay,
And I mean, that was 20 plus years ago, so it's hard for me to remember stuff.
I remember it in 1989.
Okay, so it definitely, there's
I don't think so.
something.
That's when Emma and Luvia were in school, and I talked to them about it. They don't remember this.
They don't remember Ally?
Nope.
I can
Okay.
look.
I don't
'cause have-
remember.
Let's work on that because I think it's important.
Well, the problem is that I don't know if there's records for it, but I don't think I'm pretty darn positive with Joellen that there was something there. So
Do you remember at all who the teacher may have been that was helping out with that?
I cannot remember that. I cannot remember that. I apologize.
We can check.
Maybe who you could check with is either like Mrs. Lemieux,
Okay.
and that may not be her name anymore. And then there was the math teacher, and for the life of me, I cannot think of her name.
She's not there
She
now.
had, oh, absolutely not. I would be surprised if Mrs. Lemieux was there. I think it was Mrs. Lemieux. She was a driver's ed teacher, but I want to say it wasn't Brown. You know what? I can go get my yearbook. Check amongst yourselves. I'll be right back.
This is how history is passed down by people like, wait a minute, I've got a yearbook somewhere. I love it.
So
I did
Michael's-
try to interject that a few minutes ago to say, look at the yearbooks, because that's where all the clubs will be. So that's a good idea.
All right, and I think they're in the library there.
I also corrected Joellen that our committee started in 2020. It was following the police murder of George Floyd.
Okay.
19.
All right, I'll change that as well.
Is that right? Am I right about those dates?
Well,
It was 2020, and then that was when that's when this got going.
all right, and I remember it was August, so it must have been.
It wasn't pre-pandemic, was it?
No, it was
wait.
just out at the beginning.
Right. It was 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, there's another hand up.
That William.
Yes, I would recommend and I have a couple of other things, but removing the portion on demonstrating allegiance to white supremacy in the 2020.
Because
I wouldn't say that most of the supporters were doing so. I can say that you can say that they were displaying symbols of racism as far as the Confederate battle flag, although I only saw one at a time. But I would remove that in part because if you're trying to get people engaged, I think that putting that in there is going to prevent some people from engaging. Other thing I was going to suggest is that in 1899, both Barre and Montpelier founded councils of the Knights of Columbus. And
1899. What would that be? Why would that be here?
well, they were among the people who were being discriminated against by the white Protestants. Would be
It's
the Catholics.
traditionally Italian Catholics.
Right, and French Canadian Catholics as well.
Italians who were here were anti-clerical, so it wasn't them.
So, and I think that may also be why you had, when the French Canadians came in, that may be why you had
Resistance.
Catholic churches in the Granite areas as well. But But I do know about the 1899
99 is
founding of
Columbus.
Knights of Columbus councils.
I'm going to email you about that, okay?
Okay. Yeah, I know they're going to celebrate their 125th next year. That's how I know the date. Or we're going to.
I'm going to have this put into a graphic form. And if anyone can think of anything else relevant to the topic that they would like to include, please email me because I will research it if we don't know exactly the date and insert it. Because I think, you know, history as well is it's not necessarily up for debate, so to speak, but, you know, and it's not fluid, but, you know, there are some things that could be in here that maybe aren't. So let me know.
And I believe it was 2017 when Jeffrey was first elected. He had been elected by, I think, an 8-7 vote to replace a council member. What?
All right.
Hmm?
Jeffrey's still
It
around.
was a very,
Yeah, he's around. You can get in contact with
Yeah.
him and he'll be able to provide you with the exact dates on that.
and that was not a 8-7 vote. That was like 30 something to 30. There was about 60 people in that room.
Okay, I thought it was like a very small amount of people, but
You must not.
he'll know better than I. I wasn't there.
I'll give him a call and find out about that. And I'll edit the. I think I want to leave it in here, but I will edit it so that it reflects your understanding of the City Hall Park demonstration. All right.
Yeah,
And
thank
the
you.
person that I think you might want to reach out to is Mrs. Lowe.
Mrs. Lowe.
You know what? I don't think that's her name now.
Wasn't she the health and wellness teacher?
She was the math department.
Okay, I'll see if I can find her.
So the issue at hand is that I don't know if you're going to be able to find like official documentation of it. Just as a side note. So that might be something that you might have an issue with.
Well, you know, like I said, I include oral history in my version of what history is. So I will take it. And if there's someone at the sessions who knows more, I mean, you know, we can change this. I mean, it's not like it's not carved in stone, as they would say. Thank you for going through this with me. That's good. I'll do a much better job when I present it. But you know, this is like the first pass through for us.
Yeah, Joellen, this was great. And and why I think it's great is that a common understanding of history and experiencing that with a group of people is a very powerful and grounding thing. So I really appreciate this very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the history that you provided to us tonight. I think that it's important. I think the purpose of history and literature, for that matter, is so that we understand people who are different from ourselves.
Right.
And I think that it's a very important to have that in here when we're trying to create empathy toward others. Being able to understand people who are different from ourselves is a very helpful thing in achieving that goal.
Right.
Michael, you were trying to show us something, but because your background is blurred, we can't see it.
Yeah, I was just going to show a picture of it was either Emma or Luvia. Luvia.
Yeah,
I don't
no,
know.
she got the blurred background.
Yeah,
We didn't be able to see it.
I'll try to fix that and then redo it.
You know, the more I think about the Ally Alliance in '89, it wasn't a club, it wasn't a group in '89 anyway. Is that you?
No, that's Luvia.
That's Lou, right? Ah,
Yep.
It necessarily wasn't a group. What it was safe spaces for people. And they had triangles, rainbow triangles on
right,
doors.
I remember that.
Yeah.
And that is very important. There's a very important difference between
Yeah.
a sanctioned group
Yeah,
and who are banding together because it isn't safe. So
right.
that's real important, and that would be a good part to include in the history, I think.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'll check that out. And because it was kind of a room by room, school by school kind of thing, because I remember the triangles on the doors of the teachers
Yep.
who were open to that. So I'll try and track that down. But 1989 sounds right to me. All right, great. I think that's it, folks. Yeah?
You did mention the ideal program. Did you want to do that tonight?
Too, but I wanted to make sure we were done with this. Okay. Thanks, everybody. I noticed that the ideal program is on the City Council's agenda for Tuesday. Let me get that date. Tuesday the 9th. If you want to be there, I mean, I would encourage all committee members to be there, because I did send out the ideal questionnaire to everyone so that they could fill it out. 3 of us actually did. Not required to fill it out, just so that you know what kinds of questions they're looking for. Christy, I don't know if you know about this program. This is the state's program that they came up with. It actually requires a community to send people to this program who have decision-making power in the community, like a city council member, mayor, the city manager, the HR person like Rick. And it basically requires the community to come up with a project that they have to do. And in fact, actually requires them to put some money toward it as well. So and this questionnaire that was put out is the application process for them to determine whether or not the community applying is ready for this level of participation, which the 3 of, well, I don't know, Greg also filled it out. I personally think that we're not ready for it, that the kind of thing that we're doing here with this project is going to get us ready. But I doubt very seriously that we're going to be able to convince City Council to put some bucks behind this, some big dollars. And we were lucky enough to get a grant for this project, but what they're requiring is for actual monies to come out of the coffers, and I'm not sure we're ready for that. And it's not performative at all. It's like, you don't join this and say, oh yeah, we have this ideal, we're involved in the ideal program, so we're on our way. You actually have to be on your way. So that's my thinking about it. I don't know what other folks on the committee think, but that's how I feel. I don't know, did the rest of you get a chance to look at that? And Ellen?
I did fill it out. Yeah, I mean, I feel like this what we're doing here tonight and from this represents a really solid first step in the city. And if this works well, and if this moves us, then I could see a next step either being the VLCT cohort, which is somewhat similar, but without that level of commitment, or the ideal program. But this feels like a way in to me. And it does seem like that jumps several steps ahead. And like you said, it's not meant to be a performative act. It's not a box check. It is serious commitment, staff time, people agreeing to do work to make something happen in their city as a part of that program. So I just don't think we're there. I would love us to be there.
So Ellen, are you going to be able to come on Tuesday?
So I think it's Monday because the elections are Tuesday. The vote is Tuesday.
Right.
It is Monday, yes.
Monday, okay.
So I don't know. I may be able to come.
The reason I ask, if you can't come, if you could shoot me an email that describes in detail so I can present it, the idea of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns cohort. I don't know much about that program, because maybe we can offer that up as an alternative if people are really gung-ho. I mean, I hate to let an opportunity go by, especially if people really are interested. And we know that the Vermont League of Cities and Towns is something that the city is allied with. So
Yeah, and that's on a rolling basis. I think Ideal, no, I don't think Ideal's on a rolling basis. I know the VLCT one is, and it's a little more gentle and shorter commitment. And I can look that up. Yeah.
great. Okay, are we cooked? Does
Wanted
anyone
to,
have anything to say? Rick, go ahead.
real quick, so the city of Barre has never had a personnel handbook. I have split the personnel handbook into two sections. One is operations and one is benefits, because the benefits change so frequently that rather than updating 100 and something pages, the benefits will be a shorter manual to update. And in there is a section on anti-harassment, where it talks about sexual harassment. It talks about bias, both implicit and explicit, or implicit and I can't remember the other one off the top of my head. It's been a long day. And it goes into the EEOC, it goes into diversity and equity. And so what I'd like to do is I'm going to be finalizing it and getting it out to the city manager and the assistant city manager for them to go through it. But what I'd like to do is if anybody on the committee would like it, I'll send you those sections for you to review.
Me too.
Because I think it would be really helpful to have people that have more knowledge than I do in it. Because I'm still learning. And so I will send out those sections to anybody that wants it. Joellen, I can just send it to you. And then anybody that wants it can go through it. And I'm more than willing to take all the feedback I can get, because I want this to be representative of us going forward. I don't want anything in there that's going to prevent us or hold us back. So I can get that together and send it over to you.
Yeah, and I'll send it out to everybody so that we all get a chance to look at it. And then
Yeah, that'd be great.
good. And then if people want to respond, you can respond to save poor Rick the extra work. Send it to me and I'll compile it as I did with the questionnaire from Ideal, and then send it to Rick. Does that make sense for folks? Yeah, okay, I see.
Thank you all for helping with that.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Rick. Okay. So I guess we're done, and this was pretty amazing. Does anyone have anyone else have anything to say? Anything more to say?
Could have the visitors and communications part. So
Yeah.
if anybody else who's here who wants to do
Anyone who's a visitor who would like to communicate with us, please raise your little hand that you can find at the bottom of the. Greg, by the way, it's at the bottom of the screen. If you put your cursor there and you see the circle that says reactions, if you hit on that, you can see the little hand. There you
Greg
go.
got it.
Get it.
I found it. Hopefully I'll remember that,
Don't worry. You can ask. Don't be shy.
you learn something new every day.
Where the little golden hand is. Okay, so seeing that everyone seems to be well done.
Motion to adjourn.
All right. Does it need a second? I can never remember. I don't think so. I think we could just adjourn.
Needs a second, it doesn't need a vote.
All right. Who's going to second?
I second.
Okay, Greg. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This was an extremely productive meeting. I'm really excited about this project. It's like, phew, it's been a long time coming. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.